All right, we got another fun one today. We saw a little study that Florida did. They looked at glyphosate levels in different brands of bread. And so we chose one of them at random. Actually, this is a bread that I really like. We don't do a lot of bread in the house right now, currently, but whenever we do buy bread, this is one of the ones that I usually buy. Dave's Killer Bread, 21 whole grains. And so apparently this is supposed to have just shy of 11 parts per billion of glyphosate in it. Now, one of the things that Sawyer and I were just talking about is, what is that representative of? Is that 11 parts per billion of glyphosate in a whole loaf, in a single piece? We don't know. We're gonna try a single piece. We're gonna do a couple of different things. We're gonna use our DIY kit, which this will detect down to 200 parts per billion. So I don't think there's any way, which is way below drinking water standards, but I don't think there's any way that it's actually gonna show up on here, but who knows? We'll see. Maybe they were doing, maybe it was 10 parts per billion in like 1 gram of this. And so maybe we'll just blow it off the charts. And then we're also gonna use our glyphosate kit. So we'll take this bread and we're actually gonna muddle it in one of our beakers here from the lab. Allow it to basically soak in the water for a little bit. And then we're gonna remove the supernatant from the top of that sample after everything basically falls out, sinks to the bottom. And then we'll use that supernatant for the DIY kit as well as the in-lab kit, and then we'll see what comes of it. So pretty cool. Seems like too much bread, doesn't it? Like it's a ton. I feel like we're not gonna have any water left. You gotta make sure all of that reagent gets mixed up in there, you know? There we go. That looks promising, right? Putting all of that in there. John Wick. Right.
Sure.
Yes, Ryan. So like we expected, we muddled the bread and then collected a sample. And as we expected, because we know the detection limit on our DIY glyphosate kit is 200 parts per billion. And so both lines showed up, which means it's at or below 200 parts per billion, which is, like I said, basically exactly what we expected, since the Dave's bread supposedly was at 10 or 11 parts per billion. So that's no big surprise there, but we poured off some of that water from the muddled bread and we'll put it back in the lab, and Hal, our senior environmental scientist, he will actually likely filter this and then perform the analysis for glyphosate. So really excited about that. It's going to be cool to see if we're able to get something out of the bread, and then we'll do a little follow-up afterward. So we finally got our results back on the Dave's Killer Bread and the glyphosate concentration. And then just for fun, if we can go back and actually we'll throw a screenshot or what have you of the actual outline of the study that we saw. I think we saw it actually on, how was it, Brett Cooper, her little YouTube channel. And Sarah Lee was at the top of the list. I think it was actually a study that was done in Florida though, right? So Sarah Lee came back at 200 parts per billion, or there around, as I think it was like 190 something of glyphosate. And so for both of the samples that we did, we actually got a non-detect. And you're dealing with a couple of different things. So for Dave's killer bread, found out that it's not actually that killer. and from the standpoint of how much glyphosate it has in it, you can see I'm holding an empty bag. This is actually a popular bread with people at our lab, because as soon as we used it for the glyphosate testing, I put what was left in the kitchen and everybody ate it. So we got a, as I said, we got a non-detect on that. I think in the study, there was like, I think it was 11 parts per billion from that bread. And then again, we got a non-detect on the Sarah Lee. So what do we take away from this? I think one of the things to think about whenever we're dealing specifically with processed foods, highly processed foods, you can imagine that Sarah Lee probably has several different wheat producers that actually sell to them. Because their inputs are many and varied, you might have some producers that apply glyphosate at the end of the growth season in order to desiccate the wheat, which dries it out, which means they can harvest it sooner and sometimes even get it in before the wet season starts, because sometimes if the fields get too wet, then they'll lose some of the crop, and so sometimes they will desiccate in order to prevent that from happening. That is usually when you get high levels of glyphosate in wheat. And so I'm guessing that we just happened to get a loaf of bread that they didn't use that type of wheat in, or as part of whatever. And then again with Dave's, maybe they, for the batch that the study found a higher concentration of glyphosate, again, maybe they just maybe they had to change where they got their wheat. And you're gonna find this with all sorts of highly processed foods, because you can't perfectly predict where those ingredients are going to come from. And so as a result, you can't perfectly predict what is going to be in the food. Now I'm using air quotes here because we're going to look at some candy later, and we got very different results on that. And so the moral of the story here is you're rolling the dice when it comes to processed food, because you don't know where it came from. And so maybe you can't make your own bread, maybe you can't source your own wheat berries and grind your own grain and things of that nature. And that's not what I'm saying that you have to do. But you do need to pick your battles, right? You do need to figure out what are the things that are most important, and then figure out if you can maybe get to know a little bit more about your producer or where that food comes from. Because at the end of the day, you have to be your own advocate, right? You have to take care of yourself, you have to take care of your family. And so maybe you're getting glyphosate, maybe you're not. Let's hedge our bets and try and figure out, okay, what's the best way to ensure that we're not consuming these things? Okay, so as you're getting this figured out, maybe we go back and talk about test kits, right? Because you need to know what's going into your body, what you're drinking, what you're consuming. And specifically with respect to glyphosate, we have our DIY glyphosate test kit. And so you can use that test kit to test your drinking water. You can also use it to test all sorts of different solids, right? So you're testing your soil, you can test bread, if you should so choose. You can test produce, so fruits and vegetables, things of that nature. And so if you think that there's any chance that anything that you're eating or drinking could have glyphosate, buy one of our little DIY glyphosate test kits and give it a whirl. It'll test down to 200 ppb, which is well below the EPA limit when it comes to drinking water. EPA limit, I think, is 700 ppb, parts per billion. And so if you suspect that glyphosate is anywhere in the food or liquids that you're consuming, you can use this test kit to identify the concentration of glyphosate. So go buy one. Go to our website, safehometestkits.com. Buy a glyphosate test kit. Test your bread and your water and your vegetables and your fruit, all the things. Okay.